Early 1500s, Tenochtitlan is awake before sunrise because the city cannot afford a late morning. On a narrow causeway over Lake Texcoco, porters with tumplings shuffle forward under heavy bundles, while officials stop the line to check and count. There is only so much width and only so much daylight, and if the flow stalls, the island feels it first. This is the problem that makes the whole story click. By the end of this section, you will understand how an island city used water routes, raised roads, shared rule and scheduled tribute to become powerful, and why that same setup could be used against it. Watch the causeways and canals, the Chinampas, the Triple Alliance and the tribute stream, because those are the parts that have to work every day. Two things are always true at once here. The city needs constant deliveries, but it has only a few entrances, and every entrance can be watched. And the empire can reach far, but it still depends on other towns choosing to cooperate week after week. The Valley of Mexico is a high basin ringed by mountains, with lakes spread across the low ground. Lake Texcoco is not one clean circle of water, but a shifting zone of channels, reeds and shallow flats. In the middle sits Tenochtitlan, tied to the shore by long causeways that act like gates you can count. On that early 1500s causeway, the routine is simple and tense. A runner gets waved through because messages cannot wait, but a porter gets held up because a bundle has to match what is due. When the line bunches up, everyone behind it loses time, and time is the difference between full storerooms and empty ones. The lake protects the city, but it also forces movement into lanes. With only a few raised roads and a web of canals, order is easier to enforce at the entrances. The downside is that there are not many alternate routes when something goes wrong. The Mexica turned that watery map into real capacity by building into the lake itself. Chinampas, raised fields in the shallows, made farming dense and close to the city. Canals let canoes move produce and building materials with less strain than hauling everything overland. And the causeways handled the heavy foot traffic. Mid-1400s, in the lake zone around the capital, the work looks like a project that cannot slip. Engineers mark out rectangles, crews cut reeds and drive stakes, and then mud and vegetation get packed into new beds while other crews keep channels open for canoes. The hard limit is the lake itself, because water levels shift and salty water can creep, and a fast-growing capital does not get to skip meals. When Chinampas and canals work, the payoff is huge. Food arrives close to home, the city can support more full-time specialists and warriors, and the island becomes harder to starve quickly. But the more people you feed at the centre, the more the centre has to keep the flow steady, on time, through a few narrow entrances. If you like history that follows how cities actually run, not just who won a battle, consider subscribing. We are going to stay close to the roads, the water, and the record-keeping that made power possible. It is the fastest way to see why some empires look solid right up until the day they do not. Feeding the city was only step one, because a big capital also needs cooperation beyond the lake. In the 1400s, Tenochtitlan joined with Texcoco and Tlaxcala in what we call the Triple Alliance. It was a practical way to fight together and split gains without immediately turning on each other. The alliance made expansion easier because campaigns did not have to be carried by one city alone. It also created a shared expectation about who got what after a victory. Over time, though, Tenochtitlan's weight inside the alliance grew, and the balance shifted from partnership toward dominance. What the empire demanded was often less about planting new settlers everywhere, and more about keeping deliveries coming. Tribute meant goods and labour moving toward the lake on a schedule. In many places, local rulers stayed in place, because replacing them could cost more than redirecting what their towns produced. In an inland town weeks away from the lake, a tribute deadline turns into a local emergency. Storehouses get opened, cotton cloth gets counted out, baskets of food get gathered, and porters are assigned before the road window closes. The limit is timing and distance, because if the load leaves late, it hits the causeway late, and the penalty lands on the town, not on the island. Now picture the receiving end, not the battlefield. Near the causeway gates and canal landings, Bundles get stacked, sorted, and moved again. Because nothing matters until it is in the right place at the right time. The limit here is handling and storage, because a city can only absorb so much in a day before food spoils, cloth gets damaged, or confusion turns into theft. This is where city officials face a decision under pressure, early 1500s, right at the gate. Do they let a backed-up line push through to avoid a crush and keep the road moving, or do they slow it down to verify what is owed and stop shorting and swapping? Either choice has a cost, because the causeway is narrow, the daylight is finite, and the city is counting on what is in those bundles. Tribute also has to be remembered, not just collected. Obligations were recorded in pictorial codices, including the Codex Mendoza, which shows the kinds of goods demanded and the basic shape of a system built around regular deliveries. The details can vary across sources, but the overall picture is clear enough to follow the flow. For the towns sending tribute, the pressure is constant. Someone has to translate a demand from the lake into local work and keep the peace while doing it. For the capital, the pressure is just as constant because a missed delivery is not an abstract problem when tens of thousands of people live on an island. Back on the causeway, those bundles are not random cargo. Cotton cloth, foodstuffs, raw materials, crafted items, each one tied to fields and workshops far beyond the lake. The whole chain only works if enough communities decide that paying is safer than refusing, and if the roads stay open long enough for the payments to arrive. A lake capital magnifies the reward of that compliance. Once goods reach the gates, they are already inside the most defensible zone, where canals and storerooms can redirect them to households, markets, and temple precincts like the Templo Mayor. The centre looks rich and orderly, and that appearance helps keep the system running. But the same design concentrates danger. If tribute runs late, the shortage shows up in the capital first, because that is where consumption is densest. If a rumour spreads that the centre is weak, it spreads fastest where traffic converges, because the causeways carry news as efficiently as they carry food. Keeping the tribute stream steady also meant living with risky local arrangements. Many communities could keep familiar leaders and routines as long as the deliveries arrived. That saved the empire from trying to station force everywhere. But it also meant the same local networks that gathered tribute could, under stress, gather resistance. And central Mexico had plenty of stress to go around. City-states carried grudges, market rivalries, and memories of past dominance that the Triple Alliance could use, but never fully erased. The Empire could play those divisions to keep tribute moving, yet it also had to live with the fact that divisions can be stitched into a coalition. Soon, new enemies will learn how few entrances the island really has. What matters right now is that the Empire's strength depends on narrow corridors of movement and a web of bargains that have to be renewed with every delivery. By the early 1500s, Tenochtitlan's growth turns lake engineering and alliance politics into a single outcome, steady tribute funneled through a few gates that make the island dominant. The cost is that power gets chained to schedules, storage, and local compliance, so one delay or refusal can hit the capital immediately. And once those gates become targets instead of checkpoints, the same roads that feed the city can also lead danger straight to its heart. Tenochtitlan can look calm from the water, but the real test is far from Lake Texcoco, where a delivery can fail before it ever starts. This is not a single block of land. It is a chain of altarpetal, city-states, with their own rulers and loyalties that can comply, stall, or quietly bargain for better terms. So when we say empire here, picture a network with uneven ties. Some towns are watched closely, some are handled lightly, and most of the work is getting local rulers to do the collecting for you, on time, without setting their own people on fire. Late 1400s, in a humid provincial town in the Gulf lowlands, tribute day begins at a wooden table under a shaded roof. Cotton cloth is folded into stacks, baskets are set down, and stewards for the local ruler call out counts while scribes mark what is leaving and what is staying. On the other side, tribute collectors from the lake tally bundles and check quality, while guards stand close enough to be felt. If the collectors push too hard, the town stops cooperating. If they accept too little, the collectors risk punishment for letting goods slip away. This is what rule looks like on the ground. It is deadlines, waits and inspections, plus the quiet threat that someone can come back with force if the numbers keep coming up short. The altar petal matters because it is the hinge. The empire does not have to replace every local leader. It has to make sure that leader can extract goods without losing control at home, and make sure nearby towns see that refusal has consequences. Tribute is built around things that can be counted and carried. Cloth, foodstuffs, raw materials, crafted goods, and sometimes labour, chosen because they can be measured in the province and checked again when they reach the lake. And this is where legitimacy gets decided in plain terms. If the demand matches what a town produces, the local ruler can frame it as painful but survivable. If the demand feels impossible or humiliating, the same tally table becomes the place where resentment turns into planning. We can see the general pattern in tribute lists and later descriptions, including pictorial codices like the Codex Mendoza, even if details vary by place and time. The point is not perfect paperwork. The point is regular obligations that depend on local structures to function. But getting goods onto the road is only half the job. Once loads reach the centre, they still have to be sorted, guarded and distributed, and every handoff is a chance for loss, swapping or favouritism. Early 1500s, at Tlatelolco, the market is already loud by mid-morning. Mats cover the ground in long rows, maize and beans sit in heaps, cloth is stacked in neat squares, and obsidian blades flash dark when a buyer turns them in the light. Officials move through the lanes, stopping at a stall where two buyers argue over a measure, then shifting to another where a seller is accused of swapping goods. Later accounts, including the Florentine Codex, describe market authorities who settle disputes and watch measures, and the hard part is scale, because in a crowd this big cheating can spread faster than any one official can walk. Here is what leakage looks like in practice. An official checks a standard measure against a vendor's cup, weighs a bundle, and if it is short or tampered with, the goods can be seized or a penalty imposed on the spot. That keeps the market moving, but it also creates a new temptation, because enforcement itself can be bent if people think the wrong person is getting a pass. In a market, this large-small frauds add up. A short scoop disappears into the noise. A swapped bundle looks like an honest mistake, and once people believe the rules are uneven, they stop trusting the whole lane, not just one stall. The market also shows how goods actually reach households and workshops. Tribute loads can go to storerooms and temple precincts, but everyday life still runs on buying, selling and bargaining, and that is where shortages show up first in real time on the mats. When a road is unsafe, fewer sellers arrive and prices jump. When a delivery is late, people do not argue about maps. They argue over piles of food in front of them, and the argument spreads outward through neighbourhoods. Now connect the Gulf Lowlands table to the Tlatelolco stalls. Tribute pushes goods toward Tenochtitlan by obligation, while the market pulls goods toward whoever can pay, and those currents do not always match. When they match, the capital looks rich and orderly. When they do not, officials have to decide whether to tighten inspections and punishments, or let more slide to keep the lanes calm, and either choice leaves a trail of anger. Distance makes every problem sharper. A town days or weeks away can miss a deadline because of weather, sickness or banditry, and the capital still experiences it as a shortfall that has to be answered, not explained. That is why the imperial playbook is bigger than collectors with guards. It leans on envoys to carry warnings and promises, on garrisons in key places, on marriage ties that connect local elites to the centre, and on public threat displays meant to be remembered long after the visitors leave. These tools buy time. You cannot march an army to every dispute. You try to keep disputes from turning into refusals by showing that the centre is informed, connected and willing to act. But this kind of rule also changes the moment new gains slow down. If fewer new sources are added, the centre leans harder on what it already has, and the extra pressure lands on the same local rulers who have to keep their own towns fed. That squeeze is never even. Far provinces cost more to discipline. Regions with different languages and customs are harder to read from the lake, and the farther the centre is, the easier it is for local leaders to gamble that late delivery will be tolerated. Back in the Gulf lowlands, late 1400s, the local ruler faces the decision that decides whether the whole system stays quiet. Sending the full amount can mean hunger at home and anger in the streets. Sending less can mean a return visit from men who do not come to count cloth. In Tlatelolco, early 1500s, judges face a different kind of pressure. If they let a cheating measure slide, the market learns that rules are for sale. If they punish too harshly in public, a simple dispute can turn into a wave of rumour that makes sellers stay away tomorrow. The outcome is that the empire holds together by turning conquest into routines, tribute tallies in the provinces and market oversight at the centre that keep the network paying without constant war. The cost is resentment and skimming, because every checkpoint and every handoff creates someone who feels cheated and someone tempted to cheat back. And if audits start failing in the market and provinces begin withholding at the same time, Tenochtitlan can mistake a busy city for a loyal empire right up until the deliveries stop. In the Triple Alliance, the fastest way to spot trouble is not at the frontier. It is at the meeting table, where allies decide whether they are still partners or just next in line. Late 1400s in Texcoco, noble councils gather in a courtyard with painted mats and bundles of tribute tallies laid out for reference. Senior men argue over precedence, who speaks first, who signs off, and how obligations are split, because status inside the alliance decides who pays and who collects. The hard limit is alliance pride, because a city that feels publicly lowered can comply today and still start building options for tomorrow. A stronger hand from Tenochtitlan can raise output. Orders get simpler, campaigns get coordinated, and tribute schedules get enforced with fewer delays. But that same dominance makes the whole arrangement touchier. The more one city sets the terms, the more every other city has to calculate whether cooperation is still safer than hedging. In Texcoco, late 1400s, the council has to make a decision under pressure when a dispute drags on past the point it should. If they accept a smaller share or a lower seat, they keep the alliance moving. If they block and stall, they protect their standing, but they also slow the machine that keeps rivals nervous and tribute steady. That stall does not look like rebellion. It looks like paperwork that does not get finished, envoys who wait longer than they should, and decisions that arrive late to the towns that need them. The problem is that the empire runs on timing. When the top hesitates, the bottom notices. Early 1500s at the causeway approach to Tenochtitlan, guards and administrators control entry where the road narrows over Lake Texcoco. Porters with tumplines bunch up behind a counting station while canoes nose into a landing and bundles get lifted onto the stones. The hard limit is security versus speed, because every extra inspection protects the city, but every delay starves the schedule. A runner with a message gets waved through. A porter with a mismatched bundle gets pulled aside, and the line behind him tightens until the road becomes a slow-moving knot. Those same gates are not only for food and cloth. They are also for envoys, petitions and orders, and all of it has to pass through the same few openings. That concentration makes the centre powerful on a good day. It also means a small snag at the entrance can turn into a city-wide problem before anyone far away even hears about it. Months later, on a canal landing inside the city, early 1500s, officials stack incoming bundles in rows and mark them for where they are supposed to go. A clerk pauses because 2 shipments are short, and now someone has to decide whether it is a counting error, skimming, or a town testing the limits. The hard limit is storage and handling, because the more you pile in one place, the easier it is for confusion and favouritism to hide inside the crowd. Now zoom out to the map, because not every neighbour reacts the same way. Some towns resist because they have old grudges or strong defences. Others hedge, paying on time while keeping ties open to rivals because they have learned that alliances can flip faster than fields can be replanted. Tlaxcala matters here as a standing alternative, not a prophecy. It is a place outside the tributary net where messengers can travel, where grievances can be compared, and where the idea of coordinated refusal can stay alive. And the warning signs are rarely dramatic. A precedence fight in Texcoco, a delayed convoy on a road that is usually reliable, a bottleneck at a causeway gate that turns one late delivery into a visible shortage. The centre does not automatically know why a shipment is late. Tribute records can show what arrived, but they do not always reveal whether the cause was weather, local dispute, or quiet defiance, and local rulers have every reason to offer the safest explanation. So the early warnings often look like normal friction until they line up. When several towns stall at once, the capital cannot pressure all of them quickly without pulling attention from somewhere else. And when the causeways slow down at the same time the alliance table slows down, the system starts feeding on rumour. People see backed up lines and half-full stacks, and they assume someone, somewhere, is losing control. Tenochtitlan's growing dominance inside the Triple Alliance increased short-term output by pulling decisions and tribute into one centre. The cost was political brittleness, because the same concentration that made the capital efficient also made allies and routes less forgiving when schedules slipped. And once multiple small disputes and bottlenecks align, the next threat is simple. The Empire can look busy and strong right up until cooperation breaks in several places at once. The outside force does not need to be huge. It only needs to look real on the roads and believable in the councils where survival gets decided. In 1519, Cortes arrives with a small Spanish force in a landscape of altar petal that already know how fast power can swing. What matters next is not a lone band of foreigners. It is whether local rivals decide to turn a new arrival into a usable partner. In the Tlaxcala region in 1519 to 1520, a council meets with war leaders in a courtyard where messengers keep arriving with dust on their legs. Gift bundles get set down, place names get tapped on painted cloth, and the same choice keeps returning: survive as you are or accept someone else's terms. The limiting factor is survival versus subordination, because refusing the wrong deal can mean facing the Empire alone, but accepting the wrong deal can mean trading one set of demands for another. Tlaxcala matters because it is a durable rival that never got folded into the tributary routine. It sits outside the net with its own leadership and its own memory of what it costs to be surrounded. That makes it a ready-made partner when a new force shows up asking for food, guides, and safe passage. This is the hinge of the coalition story. The Spaniards do not step into an empty field. They step into a crowded political world where indigenous polities have leverage, and every yes or no changes what the next town dares to do. In that Tlaxcala council, the decision under pressure is blunt. If they choose alliance, they can provide guides who know which roads are watched, porters who keep a column moving, and fighters who turn a strange presence into a real army. If they refuse, they keep their independence for the moment, but they risk being isolated as others start cutting their own deals. Once that choice is made, it changes what is possible on the ground. A road is not just a line on a map. It is a chain of towns that either feed you, hide you, warn you, or block you. From Tenochtitlan's side, this is not only about fighting, it is about keeping towns loyal and routes usable when loyalties are suddenly up for sale. Every time a city-state flips, the outsiders gain a safer corridor. More food, more local knowledge, and a louder signal to the next town that hesitation might be the dangerous option. And there is a wide audience for that signal. The tributary system trained communities to watch schedules, punishments, and favours, and to notice when the centre looks slow to respond. People who have lived under tribute also know exactly where it pinches, because they have carried the loads and felt the deadlines. Now bring the lake back into focus. Tenochtitlan sits on Lake Texcoco with only a few causeways and canal approaches that can handle heavy movement. If hostile forces can contest those corridors, the city's greatest strength, Concentrating goods and authority at the centre turns into a problem because there are not many other ways in. In Tenochtitlan in 1520 to 1521, administrators are trying to keep two things true at the same time. Food has to keep arriving, and orders have to keep moving, even when news arrives faster than verification, and allies become uncertain. The limiting factor is disruption and depopulation, because a city this dense only works if enough people show up every day to row, carry, count, and enforce. Picture a storehouse near a canal landing inside the city, 1520 to 1521. Bundles are stacked in rows with marks for where they should go. A clerk recounts because two piles do not match the tally, and a supervisor starts reassigning gate staff because familiar faces are missing from the tables. Canoes still nose in, but unloading slows, and a delay at the stacks becomes a delay in neighbourhoods by nightfall. At a causeway checkpoint in the same window, the problem is even more visible. The lane is narrow, the daylight is finite, and the usual rhythm of inspections breaks when there are not enough trusted hands to check measures and seals. If they wave more through to keep the road from locking up, they invite skimming and panic. If they slow everything down to verify, they risk a bottleneck that turns a routine delivery into a public shortage. This is where disease matters, not as a single magic explanation, but because it makes every existing problem hit harder at the worst moment. Outbreaks in the early Conquest period are widely attested, even if exact sequences and local impacts vary by source and region. What people would notice is simple: fewer workers, fewer officials, fewer carriers, and more uncertainty about who has the right to give orders. A tribute empire runs on people doing ordinary jobs without pause. People harvest Chinampas, load canoes, carry bundles over causeways, staff gates, and keep tallies that make obligations enforceable. When that labour pool shrinks suddenly, administrators are forced to cut corners, and the corners they cut become openings for cheating, rumour, and opportunistic refusal. Now the pressures start to lock together. The Spanish presence creates a new option for rivals. Tlaxcala and other allies provide scale and local reach, and the Lake City's chokepoints make disruption unusually effective. At the same time, sickness and leadership instability reduce the centre's ability to reassign labour, verify tallies, and keep provisioning and command steady. This is why the few Spaniards story misses the point. It was coalition building, indigenous choices, and the ability to move along real roads with real food and real guides. Guns and disease mattered, but they did not replace politics and institutions. They hit hardest when the old routines were already being pulled apart. Once enough communities decide the centre cannot protect them, the empire's own routes flip direction. Paths that once carried tribute toward Tenochtitlan can carry coordinated opposition toward it, led by people who know the causeways, the markets, and the timing of the city's needs. The decisive change is that coalition shifts and chokepoints, made far worse by depopulation, break the capital's ability to provision and command on schedule. The cost is a breakdown in food flow, authority, and succession stability inside the Lake City, and the new threat is that the same tribute and labour machinery can be taken over and used again, with a different ruler at the top. After the fall, the most important question is not what was destroyed, it is what stayed useful. The collapse was fast because roots, loyalty, and alliances broke at the same time. When the fighting ended, the next struggle was restarting collection and labour in a landscape where those links were still damaged. In Mexico City, on the scraped and rebuilt ground of Tenochtitlan in the 1520s to 1530s, a tribute office comes back to life. Spanish officials sit at a table with ledgers and seals, while indigenous intermediaries arrive with painted lists of place names and old obligations, and a line of messengers waits at the door. A clerk points to a town glyph, then to a number, and an intermediary has to turn that mark into a quota that can be carried back out on the road. The hard limit is continuity versus control, because using the old channels keeps goods moving, but it also keeps old local power in the room. Outside that office, the city is being made legible again. Stone gets pulled from ruined areas, new walls and streets cut across older paths, And neighbourhoods are renamed so officials can find households when a payment or a work draft comes due. The hard limit is simple. You can only demand what you can locate and count. What survives is not just buildings, but routines people already understand. Towns know what it means to owe regular deliveries, and local leaders know how to turn a calendar into pressure on families and workshops. Under new rule, the same roads and the same deadlines can carry taxes, service and forced labour. Local governance survives because it is useful to the new rulers. In many communities, leaders still settle disputes and assemble workers, but now they have to do it in a way that can be defended to outsiders. The hard limit is local trust, because a leader who cannot keep legitimacy at home cannot deliver anything to the city. Mexico City in the 1520s, a market lane near Tlatelolco is back in motion even as the skyline changes. A supervisor walks the mats with a standard measure in his hand, checks a seller's scoop, and then marks a fine on a small slate while onlookers press closer. If he is too soft, cheating spreads and prices jump by afternoon. If he is too harsh, the crowd turns, and tomorrow fewer sellers show up with food. The hard limit is order versus calm, because a market can be policed into silence but not into abundance. And then there is paperwork, because force is expensive and slow. If an obligation can be written down in a form a court accepts, it can be enforced again and again without sending soldiers every time. The hard limit is that Spanish officials want proof they recognise, not just what a community remembers. Central Mexico, mid-1500s, scribes work at a table with pigments, paper and ink. They copy-place glyphs and boundary marks, then add alphabetic names beside them, because a claim that cannot be read in court can lose land, water or labour obligations in a single ruling. The pressure is translation and legal proof. What cannot be turned into the right kind of record can be treated as if it never existed. This is why sources like the Codex Mendoza and the Florentine Codex can help, and also mislead. Many such records were produced or compiled in colonial settings, for officials, missionaries or lawsuits, so what they emphasise is often shaped by what the document needed to do. Here is the twist that ties it together. The same features that once made the empire run fast, scheduled deliveries, local collectors, and a system that pushed decisions through a few key offices and routes, also made it easier to take over once shocks piled up. When the centre could not reliably feed, reward or punish, the old channels did not disappear, they became available. The decisive outcome is that colonial rule rebuilt extraction by reusing tribute routes, local offices and record keeping, because those were the only tools that could restart flow at scale. The cost is that communities faced heavier drafts, legal vulnerability over land and labour, and demands backed by courts as well as force. And the new threat is that once obligation lives on paper in a conqueror's system, it can keep tightening even when the violence is no longer visible.